This week on the Unabated podcast, it is bowl season, and our own Chris K is here to break it all down for us. We're talking props, we're talking angles to take on teams, and so much more. It's a great show. Let's get to it.
Unabated. That's the new word, unabated.
Hello, everyone, and welcome on into the Unabated podcast. I'm Thomas Viola, and joining me, as always, Mr. Unabated himself, Captain Jack. Jack, it is officially bowl season, my friend. From the toilet bowls to the granddaddy of them all, the Pop-Tarts Bowl. It is going to be a fun time, and here to help break it down for us this week, we have Chris K, our own Chris K, joining us. I'm very excited. That man knows so much about college football.
He really does. And they work so hard going through all of the college player props that are out there. It is a Herculean task each week that they put on. I'm sure he's got some good information for us for bowl season ahead here.
Yeah, it is going to be a fun one. And, I'm excited. I think we should get right to it, my friend.
Let's do it.
And ladies and gentlemen, welcome on into the show, the realist, Chris K himself. Chris, it is great to be with you here. Feels weird. Normally, we're getting ready on a Friday to talk some college football props, but instead we're going to be prognosticating all about the bowls on the podcast today.
Yeah, this is a unique one, a little bit different, but equally as fun. College football is great to chat about, and bowl season is hectic and crazy as ever with everything that's going on. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to chatting a little bit different topics this time around.
Absolutely. And, it is like this is a very complicated time for betting college football here. We've had the whole season now, but with the new era, with the college football playoff, we have an extra wrinkle now with the 12-team playoff. And of course, you still have all of the other bowl games, from the lesser known ones to the, of course, most prestigious, like the Pop-Tarts Bowl and the Bad Boy Mowers Gasparilla Bowl. But we're in a new era of college football, and not everybody is going to play in every single bowl game that they have on the schedule here. And so the first question is it too early to be betting bowls? Have you already been making some bets? Do we need more news? How have you been approaching bowl season?
Yeah, I haven't made any bets because I can't. I'm in Georgia, the no fun state. But once Underdog and Prize Picks, Sleeper, et cetera, start releasing some lines, I certainly will be checking them out and trying. I would say it's not too early, but you just have to have the information. You can't just blindly bet it because you're going to run into landmines of players opting out or different situations with players going to the portal. It's a great time for information because you could anticipate and get an advantage in line movement, but at the same time that can bite you in the butt. So I would say, if you have the time, the information, the people that you trust, that you can ask questions and bounce ideas off of, I think it's no reason not to. You might get some extra value. You might run into some bad luck here and there, but ultimately, some of these ones are pretty predictable. You could probably talk to people in the industry and say, hey, like, who do you think's going to opt out? And they would have a pretty good idea of it, right? Like there's going to be some surprises, but it's truly, this is one of the things I love with college football is it's truly like an information driven sport because nothing is centralized. Nothing is like standardized, Kyle Shanahan with the 49ers gets away with some stuff, but like that's pretty much what you see every single week in college football is this lack of news that's reported. So you do some digging, some research, and you can definitely get some advantages.
Yeah, when does it start? Like when do we start seeing more news about, okay, these players are officially out for the bowl games?
Well, this week, basically the week of the 9th here, the portal opened. So you saw a floodgate of players entering the portal, but it continues on for at least a couple more days here. I'm not sure exactly when it ends, but you're going to hear news about guys sitting all the way up into the bowl game, potentially, whether that's like sitting for that would be more sitting for like the NFL draft purposes, but the portal, we still have some time to see guys move around. Coaching changes is going to impact lines and movement and things like that as well, because that creates a domino effect of like motivation and players that might follow them type of thing. So yeah, I mean, we're gonna see people move around, and it's not going to end until that game is officially over. We have horror stories if you ask Ben and Glenn and myself about the past, right? Like Tylan Wallace is a great example. He played the first half of his bowl game and then just decided to not play the second half. Like
He just opted out
he
mid-game.
just stopped. He said, "Hey, you know what? I'm good. I'm retiring." I mean, we saw Malik Neighbors last year. I'm not sure if you paid attention to that. That's a big thing in the bowl season as you kind of hunt and peck for records. I have a couple of those we can discuss later on today, but Malik Neighbors was, I can't remember the exact number, let's say 25 yards short of the LSU record for receiving yards in a season. It's pretty well known that once he hit that 25 yards, he was done. And that's just what happened. He caught a pass, hit that number, finished the drive, and didn't play another snap. So we're going to see some craziness the whole way through.
All right. So Chris, look, I admittedly don't watch a lot of college football. I don't know the players like you guys know the players. The prop team at Unabated does an amazing job of pouring over hundreds of rosters each week. What if I caught the bug right now and I had to make some college bowl bets? Is there a basic strategy for the bowl betting season? Go.
I would think there's three things you should keep in mind when you're betting. The first being really, I've already mentioned it a little bit here, is motivation. Like, how much do these teams actually care to be at that bowl game? I worked at the College Football Hall of Fame many years ago, and I could tell you based off of the teams and the players that were at like all the pre-parties and the events that happened before who was going to win the game just by were they
Really?
having themselves were they having a great time, were they in it, were they too cool for school type of thing, like you could tell 100%. And motivation is key here. Like a great example of that is Alabama playing Michigan. They're the first team out of the bowl game, out of the playoff here, the 12 team playoff, and now they're playing in the ReliaQuest Bowl against a 7-5 Michigan team. Like, how motivated are they going to be to care about winning the ReliaQuest Bowl? So I think motivation's huge. I think when you're looking at like coaching changes, I that's a very scary bet to make, is to bet on someone that's leaving, right? The big rumor this week is Rich Rod and him potentially going to West Virginia. What does that do to Jacksonville State and how they are going to face off against Ohio? So, another team that has coaching changes. I would say Ohio a little bit better situation because they are doing an interim coach that people like. Mac schools with a bunch of older players, they typically try hard because like this is a big game for them, period. And then like weather, we saw UNLV at Boise State last week, and they were constantly trying to warm up, blowing on their hands, try to get grip on the football type of thing, and they looked pretty poor. I mean, it was way worse of a game than it looked from like the box score. So I think if you look at those three types of things, you're in a good spot. Like maybe just straight avoiding those games and just focusing on the ones that have more consistent data with players that are still around, right? Those are ways to maybe target and look at the edges on the screens and the prop screens as well. So just avoiding some of those different question marks. One game that I think is really, really interesting that kind of hits on this is this TCU Louisiana game. I saw that TCU's traveling to the New Mexico Bowl on Christmas Day. Like, how much does TCU care to play Louisiana that week, and then they're traveling on Christmas Day? That to me screams a situation where I would just avoid TCU because what are they? They're not going to show up and be prepared and be caring about the New Mexico Bowl against Louisiana. So I think if you just maybe take those games out of the equation, you target the ones that have a little bit more consistent data, and you can rely on some of the different markets. Probably the best way to go for you.
Okay. Was that all three?
Those three: weather,
Okay. Okay.
coaching changes, motivation.
Motivation. Okay.
Would you
Got it.
would you say that you're just avoiding games where you're questioning motivation, or are you saying I think I have an angle here where I want to bet the other side?
I think there's games that you can definitely target where the motivation comes into play. I would say, I would love to bet Louisiana, except they're on a third quarterback. So that makes it a little bit difficult.
Mhm.
But if you look at a team like Ohio, that's going to be motivated, that cares. If you watch the MAC championship, I'm sorry, I did too. It was pretty rough. They wanted to win so bad. And so they have a bunch of seniors that want to win as well. They have an interim coach that they care about. You see that kind of step up. It's kind of like in the NFL, right? Like a guy gets canned, the replacement typically sees an uptick, well, narrative or not, right? So like an Ohio against Jacksonville State makes a lot of sense to me if Jacksonville State's Rich Rod is gone. So some of them are avoids, some of them are ones that I would bet. Just dig into it a little bit to see what that line is. Some of these lines are getting crazy. Like Florida, I think is like a 13-point favorite. Army is getting close to that as well. Army's another team that I think would be tough for Marshall to beat with Marshall's coach leaving, their quarterback leaving, their back, and then I think their other two backups are leaving. You know, I don't think that it would not be shocked if Army wins by 5 touchdowns. That
I didn't
spread's
realize
like 12
Matthew
and a
McConaughey
half.
was leaving Marshall.
Well, he had to eventually. He had to eventually. But yeah, so I mean, Army's another team, right? They care about the games they're in because like that's just the culture and structure of their team. So certainly some opportunities there, not just straight avoids.
So this college football playoff this year, the 12-team playoff, let's kind of start to step through this a little bit. Uh, it's almost like we're looking at the March Madness bracket because we're going to have, who's the Cinderella team? Who's the teams to watch? Who's got the toughest path? Does that really matter in this 12-team playoff? Is there a Cinderella team when you're talking about the 12 top teams based on the committee's rankings? Is there a tough path? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is a really great year. I'll say, like, I was always a fan of the 12-team playoff because I'm a degenerate that loves more and more games that matter, right? Like, so give me all of that. But this worked out to be really great because this is a year that I think if it's a 4-team playoff, you would have just pandemonium as to who those top four would be. In theory, Notre Dame or Texas or, even like a Penn State that played a tough Oregon game there at the end would be left out. And then now you're sitting here, just unfortunate situation. Well, now we have 12. I think all, I think in theory, all 12 could win, right? Because I don't think any of these teams are that far above everybody else. I think everybody's got some warts to them. Georgia, especially with the backup quarterback now having to play. Um, Oregon with their tough kind of, everybody talked about it, right? They're kind of their tough path. The way the seating works makes them a little bit more humanized. And then, even like everybody loves Texas, but Texas hasn't played anybody in a theory, right? They haven't really beaten anybody. You look at, a team like Penn State, who I think to me, would not be in consideration as a team that could win it all. They play SMU at home, which I think is a great weather opportunity to bet on Penn State because I just don't know. I mean, SMU's got like 70 kids from Texas. Like, how built are they for the cold of what Penn State's going to do too with the grounds and pounds and strong defense? So I think there are a couple of long shots that make sense, and I think ultimately, like, I think Oregon is the team I would pick, but I mean, I think Notre Dame is in contention with their path is a little bit thinner, and then they also have a great quarterback in Riley Leonard. They had that bad loss early to Northern Illinois, but they've just smashed opponents. They have a win at Texas A&M. They have a win at USC. They beat Georgia Tech, not in 8 overtime. So, like, I think they're in contention as I would say, kind of a longer shot. And then if you wanted like the true Cinderella, I think like an Arizona State is, if you could subscribe to the theory that Texas hasn't beat anybody, their best wins are Texas A&M and Vandy, then I think Arizona State's going to play a Texas team. They would have to beat Oregon eventually. And then they would potentially play like a Georgia team that doesn't have a true starting quarterback, and hasn't really been that great offensively this year. So I think Notre Dame and Arizona State have a shot. I mean, ultimately, though, I think if you're trying to bet the actual winner, I think Oregon as the favorite obviously makes the most sense. Kind of a square answer, but I mean, they're 13-0 for a reason. They're pretty incredible. Dylan Gabriel has, I want to say, like 16 or 18,000 passing yards in his career. Like,
Yeah.
he's been around forever and he's been great forever. So when you have a quarterback like that leading the way with Tez Johnson, and insanely slippery receiver, their offense is going to go.
I almost conjecture. I almost want to fade Oregon just on the theory of maybe the Big Ten's a little overrated. It's kind of like in the NCAA tournament, how there's always that one conference. It kind of switches up which conference it is year over year, but they're like, oh, this conference is loaded this year. And then it turns out, they were all just playing each other and they weren't actually that good. I wouldn't mind sprinkling something on Texas, but I think a big question for me, if I want to back the SEC, how big of a deal is this Carson Beck injury? I mean, Florida State jokes aside, is it really that much of a downgrade to their backup?
Um, I would say it's as bad as Carson Beck has been. I think it is still fairly significant. Um, Stockton was, I think, like 11 for 16 for 71 yards. Not really all that impressive, but he brought like a mobile element to the offense that was surprising and positive. Texas was never planning for a running quarterback, and they got shown up a little bit by that mobility. Once they realized, hey, we can just blitz him and put pressure on him, that's when he struggled, made bad choices like that horrible interception in the second half. Like, so I think ultimately, because there's going to be a couple of weeks to prepare, people are going to know that a running quarterback is a part of the offense. Um, you could compare it in theory to Florida State, but I think the difference with that is, as much as I love the same type of comments and theories, Jordan Travis was essentially like a top five Heisman type player. But
Yeah.
like the gap from him to the backup was so significant that I thought Florida State should have been in, but I can see why people would think there's a huge difference. You know, Carson Beck threw three interceptions against Texas at Texas was pretty average to decent at best the whole year. So when you're not dropping that far down in talent and production, it's not as big of a deal. But Georgia's defense has probably at least 2 to 3 first rounders on their team. Their pass rush can be insane. Um, the path is pretty good. Yeah, I kind of been a hater on Texas the whole season, and I've kind of made mention to it. Like, if you want to fade a SEC team, I think it's Texas. I never a Dabo backer, but like I think Clemson has some things that are really interesting as big underdogs. And we'll see pretty quickly, if Texas is fairly legitimate because Clemson, I think, can do enough as we saw in the ACC championship game.
Do you think there's a team not from the Big Ten or SEC that can win it all? Is it Clemson?
I think it's Notre Dame. I think it's Notre Dame
Yeah, yeah.
personally. Their defense is so strong. Their run game is so good. They control the football. They've won against good teams. If you wanted to look elsewhere, you wonder how legitimate Boise State is.
Yeah.
Their good wins are against the same team in UNLV. They played Oregon super tight in week two, super close to winning that one. I think they lost by three.
They lost with
But
the
if
last second field goal.
Yeah, I think if you're going to pick somebody though that's not in the Big Ten or the SEC, I think you have to look at Notre Dame, which is surprising because they lost to Northern Illinois, but that was many many moons ago. So there's always sometimes you learn from that type of thing,
Yeah.
and they really stepped up and bounced back. They didn't look all that great the weeks after, and you really started to doubt them, but then they really turned it on the second half of the season. So yeah, unfortunately, I watched a ton of Notre Dame betting on Riley Leonard. So I have unfortunately seen a lot of them, and they've seen a lot of different styles of offense too, with like Army and then USC and teams like that.
I'm very excited to see Genty versus quote unquote real teams. I'm curious if he can still do it, if he can still put up the arcade numbers that he's been putting up against some stiffer competition here. Of course, that's also part of the narrative of, oh, well, they didn't really play that many people, but I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, stylistically, he's kind of like a Saquon Barkley in that he
Mhm.
kind of goes like 3 yards, 2 yards, 75 yards. And I'm not sure how much of that is because of like poor scheduling. I think that his talent and production is just because of how good he is, and he can do that against anybody. The question is going to be not if GT is going to be good. It's to me, it's like if Boise State's going to win, it's because Maddox Batson has good games. Like he can produce against these top tier teams. They have a bunch of random skill players that are solid, but more like role player types. And their defense has shown to be really pretty good. But what you end up finding out after the fact is like they were potentially just great because of who they played. I think Genty, though, on the other hand, is going to perform whether it's UNLV or Colorado State or Georgia. I think he's just that good of a talent.
Now, when it comes to the playoff again, 12 teams, 4 teams get first round buys this year. But it's not like it's not like the NFL playoffs where, okay, well, we have wild card weekend and you just get a 1 week bye here. We've got Army Navy this week, and then you've still got a whole bunch of bowl season rest time. It's not like that extra week of rest is going to be as big of a difference. Are we a little more worried about the rust factor that could potentially show up with these teams that are getting the first round bye versus teams that were still well rested, but also got to play a game the week before?
I don't think so. I think it's just because the stakes are so high that
Hmm.
that you get into it. And I think, you know, bowl season's always been, these playoffs have always been like 30 days after their last game type of thing. I think if anything, it's probably helpful more than ever to have that extra week because you do get time to get healthy and things like that. So I would say this season can be pretty grueling. You get that extra week, it's going to end up being more helpful than not. Can't remember really the last time a team showed up in the playoff that was a very good team that just fell on their face.
Hmm.
Typically, it's they are who they are, and they just weren't as good as others, right? Like my Michigan Wolverines is showing up against Georgia and getting smacked because that's their talent comparison to Georgia. So I think it's going to help them more than it would hurt them to have all that extra time off. Um, People argued for a while that like, hey, it probably would be better to be like the 5 seed because you get that really good matchup against the 4, which is essentially like the weakest conference champion, the other weakest conference champion. And you get the home game. The home game is so clutch and such a cool experience for the fans. And I would imagine every single home team is going to win just based on like the matchups and everything. I would probably law of averages probably says one of them loses, but it's probably not as bad of a disadvantage to play an extra game compared to like a Oregon who gets the extra week off, but now it's kind of pegged to this weird, tougher stretch of the playoff uh, kind of bracket.
Hmm. Now, Jack, putting on the advantage player hat for a second here, when it comes to the other bowl, the non-playoff bowl games, are you looking to bet a lot more underdogs? Are you looking to embrace some of the variance with some of these teams who maybe have last minute call outs, things like that? What's your approach when it comes to some of these bowl games?
Yeah, it's sort of an AP strategy to always embrace variance when it's on your side. I didn't say that too well, but in other words, you want to bet the underdog early and you want to bet the favorite late if you're going to bet on a game. And I'm talking like the money line, like betting a team that's 12 to 1, in a game. You want to bet that early and have the variance kind of play to your advantage. But that's not a hard fast rule. That's
Hmm.
just you don't want to be laying a heavy favorite, in terms of price. I'm talking money line price early. You don't, that would be an inefficient use of your capital as well as just the wrong general theory. I did have a question for Chris though about College Bowl Pick'em and Survivor. I know our friends over there at Splash Sports, they have both Survivor and Pick'em pools this year. The Survivor's a little weird. You have to like pick all the winners, but you have to have at least like 3 survive or something. I don't know. I couldn't figure it out. It's not available in my state, of course.
Much
Probably
like the
not
committee,
available.
we're making this up as we go along.
Yeah. I don't know, but you guys can check it out. This isn't an ad for Splash Sports. They don't pay us anything. Um, but Chris, I wanted your opinion on like, is there an edge to be found in pick'em contests, and if so, how?
Well, I think years ago people would have said, "Hey, like the line movement from like when these contests are created to what they are at the time of game is going to be huge." And we've seen that. Like if you enter a contest, one of the sites I work with, like it shows, and then you can look at ESPN or go to the Unabated screen and see the new lines and what they offered at all the different books. There's a pretty wide gap, and you can get some edges there. And I think knowing that you could nowadays probably use it to understand where the heavy volume is going to be, like where everybody in your pool is going to be, right? Like if Army opened up as a 7 point favorite against Marshall, and because of all the changes now, they're 13 point favorite, pretty much everyone's going to pick, see that, Army at -7 is a huge value. It would be potentially risky to take Marshall plus 13 or, +7 or what have you, but at least you know where the odds lay, where you're potentially fading and, you seeing that ownership in a sense. And then the other thing I would think of, I mean, it's so straightforward and things get so crazy with bowl season. And I would say pay attention to like when these things lock. Do they lock the time of the first bowl game this weekend, or do they lock at the time of game? Because those line movements continue to change. And then pay attention to with this playoff system. Now we get tiers of like you pick who's going to win between Notre Dame and Indiana. you're going to have to maybe put confidence points on those teams and that winner. And then you'd have to win it, put the confidence points again on the winner. And so what I would say is, really probably don't spend a ton of your confidence points on some of those playoff matchups because if you're picking, Notre Dame to win the first game, then the second game, the third game, you're really kind of putting yourself in a tough spot. Like, what if they get an injury and they lose week one, right? Then you're losing three times at a higher amount of confidence points. So I'd be wary of how much you put point wise on like those semifinal and championship matchups because that team could possibly just not even make it, right? Like a 14 playoff, fairly simple. It's just two games you got to win, but 12 team, some of these teams have to win three times. So if you're going to think they're going to win it all, you're in a potentially a tough spot if they lose in that first round.
Now, when it comes to props, how are you approaching prop betting on some of these games? Is it more difficult to predict usage when it comes to building projections? Are you feeling like the opt-outs are creating more opportunity for you? How are you approaching that?
It depends on the team. You know, Sam Houston State, all four of the running backs that like have really seen have seen usage this season are all out. Like, how are you going to project that? You pretty much you're grinding into local newspaper articles and trying to get coach speak and things like that. So those are very tough situations. Like a maybe an easier situation is something like a Missouri where Luther Burden's opted out. He's their receiver one, but he's kind of missed some time already this season. How did Missouri play when Luther Burden was out due to injury? Well, now he's out for the NFL in the draft, but you'd see that Theo Weiss season uptick in usage. So I think there are certainly scenarios where opt-outs make a ton of sense into like where we can kind of pick and choose and understand usage in those types of scenarios. The other ones, Marshall, the tougher situation is probably going to be like, Marshall being on their fourth quarterback, a true freshman. How how low can you actually go on some of these baselines and predictions on how well they're going to perform? I would think that this is going to be a really strong season for unders. We already like unders, period. But like, how many successful receivers are there going to be for Marshall with a fourth string quarterback? The other way to think about this is I call it quiet quitting. It's something I just thought of this week. With these bowl games, there's a lot of season and career records on the line. So like if Harold Fannon's the tight end from Bowling Green, he said that he's going to play the bowl game. He's also only like 14 yards away from the tight end record for yardage in a season, like period. Um, so like, does he pull another Malik Neighbors? If books aren't kind of on top of it, they might put out a line of Fannon's receiving yards at 75 and a half. Well, he might sit after he gets that 14 yards. Same, the other one that I've thought of and seen that's pretty relevant is Amarian Hampton, the running back for UNC. I want to say he's around 62 yards away from season record for rushing yards. His line is, I mean, honestly, going to be probably around 100. You get a little bit of a gap there. Like, is he going to play the full game? If you like the under to begin with, he could easily hit that 62 number and then sit. I mean, Hampton's a guy that's going to go to the NFL, I would imagine. He, how bad does he want the record? I would imagine probably pretty bad. And then once he gets it, does he finish the game out? So those are things that we've been able to take advantage of in the past. You just have to kind of dig into a little bit of like the record books and, hey, is this guy going to go to the NFL? And if so, keep an eye on certainly not betting overs on guys that could potentially sit at half, like Talon Wallace earlier I talked about.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing some knowledge for the bowl games. I'm excited. I feel like this has been a fantastic primer for someone to come in and say, okay, cool. Here are the angles that I want to attack. Here's the things that I want to be checking out as far as these bowl games go. It's going to be very exciting seeing how the 12 team playoff shakes out.
Yeah, this is a great like proof of concept year. I mean, 12 teams, I think that all have a legitimate shot at winning it, some way more than others. If we're arguing over who the 12th team should be and that's in it, I think we're having a great year because four would have been tough and
Yeah.
we're resulting in some really good games. I think they'll make some tweaks based off of this year. Automatic seeding probably isn't going to be a thing in the future just because of what happened with the bracket. But
Yep.
I mean, when we're getting more games, more players that are not opting out, I think we're all winners in the end.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, thank you again so much for taking the time today. It has been a pleasure. If people want to check you out, of course, they can head to Twitter at RealistChrisK, but they can also check out the Unabated Discord where you are always dishing out some value, dishing out some alpha for members. It is free. Be sure to check out, use the link in our description of this video, and you'll be able to sign up for the Discord and check out all of Chris's awesome work with our Unabated CFB props. And of course, we'll be back on Unabated Live on the YouTube channel, talking more props as we start getting closer to bowl game times and we start dropping some projections there to talk about. I'm looking forward to it. It is going to be a fun bowl season. I hope you all enjoy it as well. And of course, let's cash some tickets. We'll see you next time, everybody.